The first thing anyone would have noticed about Daniel Voss, had they been paying attention, was how still he held his hands. Flight 1847, departing Seattle-Tacoma for Reagan National at 6:10 in the morning, smelled of recycled cabin air and the burnt sugar edge of someone's airport-bought latte. Outside the oval windows, the sky was the color of a healing bruise, not yet committed to mourning. Daniel sat in 14C, aisle economy, a gray canvas duffel tucked beneath the seat in front of him with a precision that suggested a man who had packed bags for a living. Once, somewhere that mattered. He was 58, broad through the shoulders in the way of someone who used to run and now mostly walked, with a close gray beard and the kind of weathered, sun-creased face that had spent decades squinting at things far away. Runways, instrument panels, the horizon line where weather turns bad. His jacket was navy, unmarked, the elbows gone soft with wear. In his left ear sat a small beige hearing aid, barely visible beneath a fringe of gray hair. He'd worn one or another version of it for 11 years, since a runway incident at Anchorage that had cost him 60% of the hearing in that ear and very nearly his life. He didn't think about it often anymore. It was just part of how he heard the world now. Slightly delayed, digitally cleaned, but his. He was flying to Washington for a closed-door hearing on a fatal cargo door failure, the third in 18 months involving the same manufacturer, and he had not slept well in 4 nights. He didn't tell people what he did unless they asked twice. He preferred, on flights, to be no one in particular, a tired man with tired eyes who wanted black coffee and quiet. 2 rows up, a woman named Priya Anand was already 3 chapters into a paperback, her toddler asleep against her shoulder. Across the aisle, a young man in his 20s. University hoodie, headphones the size of dinner plates, had his eyes closed before the seatbelt sign even dinged off. The flight attendants moved through their pre-departure choreography. Renata, dark hair pulled back tight, calling out final head counts. Theo, younger, still new enough to smile at every passenger like it was a personal favor. The safety video played. The captain's voice came over the intercom, easy and unhurried, mentioning light chop over the Rockies and a 4-hour 10-minute flight time. The plane began its slow crawl toward the runway, engines murmuring up through the floor. Daniel reached up, out of habit, and adjusted the hearing aid's volume down a notch. The cabin noise without it was a soft gray hush, comfortable, familiar. That was when he heard, faintly the way you hear a wasp before you see it, a voice rising near the boarding door, sharp, already aggrieved, the kind of voice that had decided, before anyone had done anything to it, that today would require punishment to be dispensed. He didn't look up, not yet, but something in his chest, trained by years of reading rooms before they turned, went quiet and alert. Karen Whitfield came down the aisle like weather. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, blonde hair flat-ironed to a glassy sheen, a cream blazer that had clearly never been creased by an economy seatback, and sunglasses pushed up into her hair though the sun had not yet cleared the runway lights. A quilted leather tote, the kind with a logo small enough to be smug about it, swung from her elbow and clipped 2 seatbacks on her way down row 14. She did not apologize. "This can't be right," she said to no one, to everyone, holding her boarding pass at arm's length like it had personally offended her. "I booked an aisle. I always book an aisle." Renata appeared, professional smile already in place. "Ma'am, I can check that for you, but this flight is full, so." "I didn't ask if the flight was full." Karen's voice didn't rise so much as sharpen, the way a blade does. "I asked you to fix my seat." She didn't sit. She stood in the aisle, holding up the boarding queue behind her, while she attempted to wedge a rolling bag the size of a small ottoman into an overhead bin that was already, demonstrably, not built for it. "This doesn't fit," she announced, as though the bin had failed a test. "I can gate-check that for you at no charge," Theo offered. "I am not gate-checking a $4,000 bag." She said the number like a credential. "Do you know who I had lunch with last month? The regional VP of this airline. Personally, I'll be mentioning this." She finally crammed the bag in sideways, denting a stranger's hatbox in the process, and dropped into 14A, the window seat beside Daniel, radiating the particular fury of someone who has won an argument no one was having with her. "For the first 11 minutes of taxi," she complained, About the seat back pocket, about the temperature, about a baby 2 rows back whose existence she found personally inconvenient. Then her eyes landed on Daniel. It wasn't anything he'd done. He would think about this later, turn it over, try to locate the cause and fail. Maybe it was the hearing aid catching the cabin light. Maybe it was simply that he was there, calm, unbothered, the only surface in arm's reach that hadn't yet reflected her anger back at her. "Excuse me," she said. Not to get his attention, but to announce that she already had it. "Could you not lean into my space? Some of us actually paid for first-class energy back here." Daniel turned his head slightly, the way he did when he was relying on lip movement more than sound. "I'm sorry," I said. Karen repeated, louder now, the way people do when they've decided someone is either deaf or stupid and haven't bothered to determine which. "Stop leaning." He hadn't leaned anywhere, but he nodded once, settled his shoulder a half-inch toward his own armrest, and said nothing more. It would not be enough. The seatbelt sign blinked off 40 minutes into the flight, somewhere above the brown folds of eastern Washington, and Renata began her drink service 3 rows back. Daniel had his tray down, a black coffee sweating faintly in its paper cup, his eyes half closed, running through testimony language in his head. Catastrophic failure consistent with prior maintenance bulletin, when Karen's voice cracked the cabin open again. "This is not what I ordered." She was holding a ginger ale like it had betrayed her personally. "I asked for a Bloody Mary. Is that so complicated?" "I'm so sorry, ma'am, we're out of—" "Of course you are." Karen set the can down hard enough that it foamed over the rim, hissing onto the tray table, onto her own sleeve, and, this was the part she would not, later, be able to satisfactorily explain, onto Daniel's forearm where it rested near the shared armrest. He didn't flinch. He reached for a napkin. What happened next took perhaps 4 seconds, and Daniel would replay all 4 of them, slowed down, for the rest of his life. Karen's hand came up, not toward the spill, not toward her own sleeve, but toward the side of Daniel's head, fast, a snatching motion like swatting at something she'd finally identified as the source of every indignity of the morning. Her fingers closed around the small beige curve of his hearing aid and pulled. The world did not go silent so much as it went wrong. A sharp electronic shriek of feedback as the device tore free of his ear canal. Then a muffled, underwater hush, the cabin's hum collapsing into something distant and warped, like hearing through a wall. Pain bloomed white and immediate along the cartilage of his outer ear, sharp enough that his vision swam at the edges. "Maybe now you'll listen," Karen said, and her voice, even half-heard, even garbled by the ringing in his skull, carried clearly enough to land like something thrown. She held the small device up between 2 fingers, turning it slightly, examining it with open contempt, as though she just confiscated a toy from a child who didn't deserve one. "I don't know why people bring their medical equipment into coach and expect everyone else to deal with the beeping." It hadn't beeped. It had never once beeped. But facts had stopped being relevant to Karen several exits back. Priya, 2 rows up, was already turning in her seat, one hand instinctively going to her sleeping daughter's shoulder, pulling her closer though the child hadn't stirred. "Oh my God," she said, not loudly, the way people say it when the thing in front of them doesn't fit anywhere they have a frame for. The hooded university student across the aisle pulled one massive headphone off his ear, mouth slightly open, phone forgotten in his lap. A man near the bulkhead stood halfway out of his seat and sat back down, unsure what his body was supposed to do with what he'd just watched. Daniel sat very still. His hand had come up to the side of his head, not to grab at her, not to grab back the device, but simply to press, flat-palmed, against the place where pain was loudest. His face did not contort. This was, perhaps, the strangest part of it, the thing the cabin would talk about after. He did not yell. He breathed in through his nose, once, slow, the kind of breath a person takes when they have spent years being trained not to escalate a room that is already escalating itself. "That's mine," he said. His voice came out quieter than usual, half-deafened, careful. "I'd like it back. Maybe buy one that doesn't fall out so easily," Karen said, and did not hand it back. She set it instead on her own tray table, beside the spilled ginger ale, like evidence in a case she'd already decided she'd won. Renata arrived at a half-run, Drink cart abandoned mid-aisle. Ma'am, what happened? Did something. Her eyes went from the device on the tray table to Daniel's hand at his ear to the spreading wet patch on his sleeve, and her professional composure cracked, just slightly, into something closer to disbelief. Did you take that off him? He was being aggressive, Karen said, and the lie came so fast, so smooth, that for half a second it almost sounded like she believed it. I felt threatened. She grabbed it off his head, Priya said, standing now, her voice shaking with an anger that had nowhere yet to go. I saw the whole thing. She ripped it off him. Nobody asked you? Karen snapped, and something in her voice had gone thin and brittle, the first hairline crack in the certainty she wore like armor. Renata didn't argue with her. She crouched instead beside Daniel's seat, her voice dropping into the low, even register flight attendants are trained into for exactly these seconds. Sir, are you hurt? Can I get you anything? I need to call this up to the flight deck. I'm all right, Daniel said, though his ear was burning, a thin warmth he suspected was blood at the rim. He looked not at Renata, but down the aisle 2 rows back, where a man in a gray polo who had boarded with a roller bag and a magazine he hadn't once opened was already rising from his seat, one hand resting with quiet purpose against his own hip. Their eyes met. A small, economical nod passed between them. The kind of nod that meant not yet, but soon, and Daniel let his hand drift, slowly, unhurried, toward the inside pocket of his navy jacket. What happened over the next 90 seconds happened in a register the cabin would describe afterward in radically different ways. Some said it felt instant, others swore it stretched on for minutes, but what was true for everyone was the silence. Real silence. The kind that falls when 40 strangers simultaneously understand they are witnessing something they will tell people about for years. Daniel didn't stand. He reached into his jacket and drew out a slim leather case, the leather gone dark and soft at the corners from years of handling, and opened it one-handed against his knee. The badge inside was federal issue, heavier than it looked, gold-toned metal with a raised eagle and a blue enamel field beneath it. The words Federal Aviation Administration arced above a seal, and below it, in small embossed type, Daniel R. Voss, Senior Inspector, Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention. Renata's eyes found it first, and her face did something complicated, surprise, then a fast, sober recalibration, like watching someone reread a sentence they'd badly misjudged the first time. Sir, she said, and her tone shifted entirely. I had no idea. You weren't meant to, Daniel said. He still hadn't raised his voice. I'd like my hearing aid back, please. Karen's face, in the 5 seconds that followed, performed an entire autopsy on itself. Confusion first. A small furrow, as if the words Federal Aviation Administration hadn't yet finished landing. Then the slow churn of processing, her eyes flicking from the badge to his face to the man in the gray polo who was now standing fully in the aisle. Then the dawning, sickly understanding, color draining out from beneath her foundation in blotches. Then a flailing, useless attempt at recovery. I didn't, he never said, as if a job title were a thing a victim was required to announce before being assaulted. And then, last, the moment her mouth simply stopped working, because there was nowhere left for the sentence to go. The man in the gray polo was already at Daniel's row, a thin wallet of his own held low and open. Air Marshal Reyes, he said, not to Daniel, to Karen. Ma'am, I need you to hand over the item on your tray and keep both hands where I can see them. This is insane, Karen said, but the word came out smaller than she meant it to. The volume control on her own outrage suddenly, unfamiliarly, beyond her command. It was an accident. You can explain that to the FBI agents who'll be waiting at the gate, Reyes said. This flight is now diverting to Denver. The captain's voice came over the intercom less than a minute later, calm, unhurried. The voice of a man who'd clearly been briefed in the last 90 seconds and had decided the cabin deserved honesty without panic. Folks, due to a security matter in the cabin, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Denver. I'd ask everyone to remain seated with your belts fastened. We appreciate your patience. No one in economy needed the explanation. They'd watched it happen. Reyes took the hearing aid from the tray table himself, careful, 2 fingers, and placed it gently into Daniel's open palm. Daniel turned it over once, checked the small dent along its curve, and fit it back behind his ear. The cabin's hum rushed back in, full and present, and with it, for the first time, the sound of Priya's daughter starting to whimper awake, and a low murmuring building somewhere behind row 16. The sound, Daniel realized, of people who had decided, collectively and without coordination, that they were furious on his behalf. "Ma'am, hands?" Reyes said again, and this time Karen complied, wrists turning up with the stunned obedience of someone whose entire framework for how rooms operated had just been quietly, irreversibly revised. Daniel finally spoke, and the cabin went still to hear it. "I've spent 30 years investigating what happens when people don't take warnings seriously," he said, not loud, not performing, just tired and exact. "You didn't hurt me because I'm fragile. You hurt me because you decided I didn't matter enough to listen to. That's the only part of this I find genuinely dangerous." He looked at her for a moment longer, then looked away. "Done. I don't need an apology. I need you to think next time, before your hands decide something your head hasn't agreed to yet." The applause started 2 rows back. Uncertain at first, a single pair of hands, then Priya's, then the university students, spreading down the cabin in a ragged wave that wasn't celebration exactly, more like the release of something the whole plane had been holding its breath against. Renata's eyes were wet. A boy near the front asked his mother, loud in the particular way children ask the questions adults are too polite to, "Is that lady going to jail?" And didn't get an answer, because his mother was watching too. When the plane touched down in Denver 18 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers and a man in a windbreaker marked FBI met it at the jet bridge. Karen Whitfield was walked off in handcuffs, down an aisle of faces that had stopped pretending not to look, past a row 14 she would never sit in again, through a cabin door she crossed without a single word left to say. The cabin did not feel triumphant in her absence. It felt mostly like the moment after a held breath finally lets go. The flight resumed 40 minutes later, a different crew member quietly swapping Daniel into an empty first-class seat without being asked. An apology Renata delivered 3 separate times before he gently told her she didn't need to keep offering it. Somewhere over Kansas, with the cabin lights dimmed and the engine noise gone soft and steady under him, Daniel finally closed his eyes. Not asleep, just resting, the hearing aid warm and familiar behind his ear again. He learned later, from a federal prosecutor's brief assistant, the language his case would carry forward in assault on a flight, interference with a flight crew, federal charges pending in the District of Colorado. The airline issued a statement within the day, a lifetime ban, an internal review of how escalating passenger conduct was identified and reported, a personal letter to Daniel that he read once and set aside. What stayed with him longer than any of it was smaller. The boy's voice asking if she was going to jail, and the particular quiet of the cabin afterward. Not relief exactly, but the sound of people remembering all at once that paying attention to each other had never actually been optional.